In the fall of 2021, I thought moving into a quiet townhouse in southern Illinois would help me put my life back together. I was 27 years old, recently out of a difficult relationship and living alone for the first time in my life. The neighborhood seemed perfect for a fresh start. It was a small row of nearly identical townhouses tucked away at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac just outside town. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. Most of my neighbors were older couples or young families who kept to themselves. I work late shifts managing inventory at a distribution center, so I usually didn't get home until around 10 o'clock at night. Every evening followed the same routine. I'd pull into my driveway, grab my bag, and head inside. At least that's how it was supposed to be. A few days after moving in, I noticed a man standing outside one of the nearby units. At first, I didn't think much of it. He looked to be in his mid-40s, tall and heavy-set with a scruffy beard and broad shoulders. Maybe he was having a cigarette before bed. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But then I saw him again the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. No matter what time I came home, he was there, standing, watching. Sometimes he leaned against the porch railing. Sometimes he stood at the edge of his driveway. Sometimes he simply stared out into the darkness. What bothered me wasn't his presence, it was his stillness. He never checked his phone, never paced, never seemed distracted. He just stood there, perfectly still, like he was waiting for something or someone. One night, as I stepped out of my car, I glanced in his direction. The man was already looking at me, not casually, not the way neighbors usually do. He was staring directly at me. For several uncomfortable seconds, neither of us looked away. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. I quickly looked down and headed inside. After locking the door behind me, I peeked through the front window. He was still there, still watching. And for the first time since moving into that neighborhood, I felt something I couldn't explain. Fear. Not panic, not paranoia, just a quiet instinct buried deep inside me, telling me something wasn't right. At the time, I told myself I was overthinking. I had no idea that this man was about to become the beginning of the strangest and most terrifying experience of my life. After that first week, I started noticing patterns I couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't just that the man was outside at night, it was when he appeared. Almost like he knew my schedule. On weekdays, he was always there before I got home. On weekends, he showed up even earlier, sometimes just standing in the fading daylight like he had been waiting for hours. I began changing small things in my routine, leaving work earlier, taking different routes, even parking slightly farther down the street just to see if it made a difference. It didn't. No matter what I did, he was there, waiting in the same general area, always close enough for me to notice him, but never close enough to feel like I could confront him safely. One night, I decided to test something. Instead of going straight inside after parking, I stayed in my car, engine off, lights dim, just watching. At first, nothing happened. The neighborhood was still, too still. Then, slowly, the man stepped out from the shadow of his porch. He didn't walk toward me. He didn't wave. He simply stood at the edge of his driveway and faced my car, like he already knew I was watching him. That moment lasted longer than it should have. I remember my hands tightening around the steering wheel without me realizing it. Then something happened that I still struggle to explain. He tilted his head slightly. Not in confusion, not in curiosity. It felt deliberate, like recognition. And then, without breaking eye contact, he stepped back into the darkness of his porch. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was letting loneliness mess with my head. But that comfort lasted long, because later that day, I found something at my front door. A small, flat stone, cleanly placed,
centered perfectly against the bottom of my doorframe. At first, I thought it was random, until I realized something disturbing. My back gate had been propped open the same way. Something or someone had been moving around my home while I was asleep. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my window felt louder than it should have. Every passing car felt like it was slowing down too long. And at exactly 2:37 a.m., I heard it. A soft scrape right outside my back window, followed by footsteps moving slowly across the gravel. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. And then I saw it. A shadow passed across the bottom edge of the curtain. Not running, not rushing, just moving, like it had all the time in the world. That moment, I understood something I didn't want to accept. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was studying me, and they were getting closer.
The scratch beyond the glass. After that night, I started sleeping with the lights on. It didn't help much. If anything, it made everything feel worse, like the house was no longer hiding anything. Every corner felt exposed. Every shadow felt intentional. I checked the locks more times than I could count. Front door, back door, windows, even the small basement access panel I barely used. Everything was secure. At least, I thought it was. 2 nights later, I woke up again at exactly 2:37 a.m. I remember that time clearly because it started becoming a pattern I couldn't ignore. That night, I didn't hear footsteps first. I heard metal. A slow, dragging scrape, like something being pulled across wood or concrete. I sat up immediately. The house was silent in that unnatural way where even your own breathing felt too loud. Then came the second sound, a soft tap right outside the sliding glass door at the back of my house. I froze. My backyard was covered in small decorative gravel. Anything moving across it should have been loud enough to wake the entire block. But this wasn't loud. It was controlled, measured, like whoever was out there knew exactly how to move without making noise. I slowly got out of bed. No weapon, no plan, just instinct. I crouched near the hallway and looked toward the back window. The motion light outside hadn't turned on. That meant one of two things. Either nothing was there, or whoever was there was staying just out of range. Then the handle on the sliding door moved, just slightly. A testing motion, not aggressive, curious, like someone checking if I was awake. My throat went dry. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just listened as the handle moved again, this time harder. Not enough to break it, just enough to confirm something. I was inside, and they were outside. Seconds passed, then minutes. It felt like time had stopped entirely. Finally, I heard footsteps again, slow, deliberate, moving away from the door, across the gravel, and fading into silence. I waited for what felt like an hour before I moved. When I finally looked outside, there was nothing. No footprints I could clearly make out. No sign of forced entry. Nothing except one detail that made my stomach drop. Pressed against the bottom edge of the sliding door frame was a flat stone, exactly like the one I had found before, except this time it was placed from the outside. That was when I stopped telling myself it was random, because someone wasn't just watching me. They were mapping my house and learning how it responded. This was no longer just a feeling. It was an escalation. After finding the stone at my sliding door, I stopped sleeping properly. I started staying up late on purpose, telling myself I was just monitoring things. But deep down, I knew I was scared to close my eyes. Every sound outside felt calculated now, not random, not natural, calculated. The neighborhood itself hadn't changed, but my perception of it had. What used to feel like a quiet suburban street now felt like a stage where something was waiting for its cue. And always there was the man, the one 3 doors down. He didn't act differently, which somehow made it worse. Still standing, still watching, still there whenever I looked. But now I started noticing something I hadn't paid attention to before. Sometimes when I came home late, he wasn't just outside his house. He was slightly closer than before. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to make me question my memory. One night, I decided to do something I probably shouldn't have. I walked down the sidewalk instead of going straight inside, just to get a closer look, just to convince myself I was overreacting. As I approached his unit, I slowed down. My heart was already beating harder than it should have been. He was standing near his porch rail like usual, but this time something felt different. He wasn't looking toward the street. He was looking at me, waiting. I stopped at what felt like a safe distance. For a moment, neither of us moved. The street behind me was completely empty. No cars, no voices, just silence. Then I raised my hand slightly. Not a wave, just acknowledgement, a simple human gesture. He didn't respond. Instead, he took one step forward. That was it, just one step. But it changed everything. Because in that moment, I realized something I had been avoiding since the beginning. He wasn't standing there randomly. He wasn't passing time. He wasn't even watching the neighborhood. He was watching me, specifically. My chest tightened. I took a step back without thinking, and that's when I saw something behind him, a small, barely noticeable detail. His front door wasn't fully closed. It was slightly open, just enough for darkness to spill out, as if something inside didn't want to be seen. I didn't wait. I turned around and walked fast back to my house. Too fast, but I could feel it. Even without looking back, I could feel him still there, watching, not moving, not following, just waiting. Like he already knew I would come back. And worse, like he knew I wouldn't understand what I was really dealing with yet. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat in the dark and listened to the silence outside my window. And for the first time, I started to wonder if the man down the street was the danger, or if he was just the part I was allowed to see. The question haunted me for the next 2 days. Was the man the threat, or was he connected to something even worse? I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every night felt heavier than the last. Every shadow outside my townhouse seemed to linger longer than it should. I finally decided enough was enough. If someone was coming into my backyard, I needed proof. The next morning, I drove to an electronics store and bought 2 security cameras. One faced the front porch. The other overlooked the backyard and sliding glass door. Installing them gave me a small sense of control. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I might finally get answers. That feeling didn't last. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, nothing happened. On the third night, I stayed awake in my living room watching the camera feeds on my phone. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, then 2. The neighborhood remained silent. At 2:23 a.m., the backyard camera suddenly activated. A notification appeared on my screen. Motion detected. My stomach dropped.
I opened the live feed. At first, I saw nothing, just darkness and the pale glow of the motion light. Then, a figure stepped into frame. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black hoodie. His face remained hidden beneath the hood as he moved through the yard. What terrified me wasn't that he was there, it was how confidently he moved, like he had walked that exact path before, like he knew every inch of my property. The figure approached the sliding glass door, then stopped. For several seconds he simply stood there, looking directly toward the house, looking toward my bedroom, toward me. My hands started shaking. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. Then the man slowly lifted his head. His face became visible, and I recognized him instantly. It was the neighbor, the man from 3 doors down. But what happened next still gives me chills. He looked directly at the camera and smiled. Not a friendly smile, not even a threatening one. It looked wrong, like someone trying to imitate a human expression without understanding how smiles actually worked. Slowly, deliberately, the corners of his mouth stretched wider and wider. Then he raised one gloved hand and pointed directly at the camera, at me. The screen suddenly flickered. For less than a second, when the image returned, he was gone. No running, no footsteps, no movement. Just gone, as if he had vanished into the darkness. Police arrived 30 minutes later. They watched the footage. They admitted it was disturbing, but legally there wasn't much they could do. No trespassing charges, no property damage, no arrest, nothing. The next morning, I stepped into the backyard. That's when I saw the handprints. 4 muddy handprints pressed against the glass door. Too high, too low, like someone had been crouched there for a very long time, watching, waiting. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I noticed something else. Written into the dirt beneath the window was a single word. A word that would eventually connect everything that happened next. Everything. The word was answer.
What you're about to hear is real and horrifying. Tell me, where are you listening from? Feeling uneasy in your chest? Comment below. If you're new, follow now. The house at the end of the dirt road. I moved out 6 days later. I didn't wait for the lease to end. I didn't care about losing my security deposit. I just wanted to get away from that neighborhood, away from the man in the black hoodie, and away from the word that had been scratched into the dirt outside my bedroom window. Answer. For months, I tried to forget everything, and eventually, life started feeling normal again. Then, in the spring of 2022, I accepted a new position with a property preservation company. The job involved inspecting abandoned and foreclosed properties throughout rural parts of the Midwest and Northeast. Most assignments were uneventful. Board up a few windows, take photographs, catalog belongings, move on. Simple. At least that's what I thought. One rainy Tuesday morning, my supervisor handed me a file and told me I was covering a property in a remote section of upstate New York. The owner had died several years earlier. No surviving relatives, no active utilities, no recent visitors. The property had been sitting empty for a long time. As soon as I saw the photograph attached to the file, something felt familiar. Not the house itself, the feeling. That same knot in my stomach I used to get every time I looked out my townhouse window at night. The drive took nearly 4 hours. The farther I traveled, the fewer houses I saw. Eventually, the paved road turned to gravel. Then gravel turned to dirt.
Dense woods surrounded both sides of the road. No traffic, no people, no signs of life, just endless trees. When I finally reached the property, the house sat alone at the end of a narrow clearing. It looked forgotten: weathered siding, overgrown weeds, a sagging porch, and silence. An unnatural kind of silence, the kind that makes you notice your own breathing. I grabbed my equipment and approached the front door. The lockbox key worked. The door opened with a long groan. Dust filled the air. The smell inside reminded me of damp wood and old paper. For several minutes, everything seemed normal. I photographed each room, documented furniture, recorded damages. Just another abandoned house. Then my phone rang. The sound nearly made me jump. I looked at the screen. Unknown caller. My heart instantly skipped a beat. I checked the signal indicator. 0 bars. No service, no Wi-Fi, nothing. Yet, somehow, my phone was ringing. The memory of that word outside my old townhouse suddenly came rushing back. Answer. The phone continued vibrating in my hand. Against my better judgment, I accepted the call and immediately heard static. This time, however, there was something else hidden beneath the noise. A voice, faint, distant, barely audible. A man's voice, whispering only 3 words. Don't answer it. The line went dead. I stood frozen in the middle of the empty house, confused, terrified, because there was only one problem. I had just answered the phone, and somewhere deeper inside that abandoned house, another phone had started ringing.
The second ring came from somewhere inside the house. Not my phone. Something else. A deeper, hollow sound, like it was traveling through walls that had no right to carry sound anymore. I turned slowly, trying to locate it. The house was too quiet. Every step I took made the floorboards complain under my weight, as if I was disturbing something that had been sleeping for a long time. Then I heard it again. Ring. Closer this time. I followed the sound down a narrow hallway I hadn't fully explored yet. The air grew colder the farther I went, like I was walking away from reality and into something older. At the end of the hallway was a bedroom, door slightly open. The ringing stopped the moment I reached it. I pushed the door open. Inside, the room looked untouched for years. A bed covered in a thin sheet of dust, curtains hanging stiff against the window, and on the nightstand, a rotary phone. Old, off-white, disconnected from everything. But it looked too clean compared to the rest of the room, like it had been placed there recently. As I stared at it, my phone vibrated again. Unknown caller. I didn't want to answer, but my hand moved anyway, like something was guiding it. I brought the phone to my ear. Static filled my head. Then, underneath it, a voice. Not loud, not aggressive, almost calm. You're already inside it. My breathing stopped. I stepped back, lowering the phone. The rotary phone in the bedroom began ringing again, this time louder, violent, impossible. I looked around for any explanation, wires, speakers, anything. There was nothing, just the phone and the ringing. I ran back down the hallway toward the front door, but the moment I reached the living room, my phone rang again. Unknown caller. Against every instinct I had left, I answered.
The voice was different this time, not calm, not distant, closer, almost like it was standing right behind me. "You shouldn't have come back." I spun around. Nothing. But the rotary phone in the bedroom was ringing again, and this time the sound was coming from the basement too. 2 rings, 2 locations, 1 house. And I suddenly realized something that made my stomach drop. This wasn't just an abandoned property. It was something that still had occupants. They just weren't visible, and they weren't leaving.
The second I heard the basement ring, something inside me snapped into pure survival mode. I didn't care about the job anymore. I didn't care about the inspection. I just needed to leave. But the house didn't feel like it was letting me leave. Every hallway suddenly felt longer than it should have. Every doorway looked slightly different than it did a minute before. I moved fast, heading back toward the front door. That's when I noticed it. The silence had changed. Not disappeared. Changed. Like the house was now listening to me move. The floorboard creaks felt delayed, almost like they were echoing after I stepped instead of happening in real time. Then I heard it again. Ring. This time it came from below me, directly under my feet. The basement. I froze. There was no reason for a phone to be down there. No service, no wiring, nothing. And yet the sound was unmistakable, a real physical ring. Slow, mechanical, patient. I swallowed hard and moved toward the basement door in the kitchen. It was slightly open. I don't remember leaving it that way. I stood in front of it for several seconds, debating whether to turn back or just run. Then my phone vibrated again. Unknown caller. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Static filled my ear immediately, and then the same voice returned, but this time it didn't whisper. It sounded closer. "You're standing above it." My hand tightened around the phone. I stepped forward and slowly pushed the basement door open. The stairs descended into complete darkness. No light, no sound, except the phone ringing again from below. Step by step, I started going down. Each creak of the stairs felt like it echoed too long, like the house was memorizing my movement. Halfway down, I stopped. Something was wrong with the darkness. It wasn't just absence of light. It felt dense, almost layered, like something was occupying the space that I couldn't see. Then I saw it, at the bottom of the stairs. A faint blinking light. Not a flashlight, not a device I recognized. A small indicator light, like a modem or a phone system. And beside it, a stack of notebooks. Old, yellowed, organized neatly. I picked up the top notebook, opened it, and immediately felt my entire body go cold. Names. Hundreds of them. Dates, times, short notes written beside each entry. Rang once, no answer. Answered. He heard it. Voices started after pickup. I flipped another page and stopped, because there, in the middle of the page, was a fresh entry, still wet, in ink that hadn't fully dried. My name, followed by today's date, and one sentence: "Descending now." At that exact moment, the basement phone rang again, directly behind me. This time, it wasn't downstairs anymore. It was right at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. I didn't turn around immediately. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring at the notebook in my hands, trying to convince myself I had misread it. Descending now. My name. My exact arrival time. It felt impossible, like the house was reacting in real time to my presence. Then the phone rang again, Closer, sharper. This time I couldn't ignore it. I slowly turned. The basement was still dark behind me, but now there was something different in the sound. The ring wasn't just coming from a device anymore. It felt like it was coming from the space itself, like the house had learned how to imitate a phone. I took one step back up the stairs, then another. The ringing stopped instantly. Silence rushed in so fast it felt unnatural. I should have left then. I should have run out of the house and never looked back. But I didn't, because something on the notebook page kept pulling my attention. There were margins filled with older handwriting, notes written in different inks, different styles, different names, different dates. Like this wasn't the first time this had happened. Like I wasn't the first person to stand in that basement reading those words. I flipped back through pages faster. My hands were shaking now. Every page followed the same structure. Name, date, outcome. But the outcomes were getting worse. Warned him. He still answered. He heard the second voice. Did not leave in time. And then I found something that made my stomach drop completely. A section labeled Confirmed Instances. Below it were dozens of entries that didn't match anything I could explain. Some entries were decades old, some were recent, all different names, all ending the same way. The house didn't just receive calls, it recorded them, studied them, remembered them. And then I heard something behind me again. Not the phone this time. A voice. Low. Close. Right at the base of the stairs. You're reading the wrong part. My entire body locked up. I didn't move, didn't breathe, because I realized something even worse than the voice. It didn't come from upstairs. It came from below the stairs I was standing on, from deeper inside the basement than I could see. And for the first time, I understood I wasn't alone in that space. I was inside something that had been waiting for people like me for a very long time, and I had already followed it too far. I backed up instinctively, but there was nowhere safe to go. The basement stairs felt narrower now, like the walls had subtly shifted closer while I wasn't paying attention. The air had changed too, heavier, thicker, like breathing inside a sealed room that had been shut for too long. From below the stairs, I heard movement. Not footsteps exactly, more like something adjusting itself in the dark. Slow, patient, aware. I tightened my grip on the notebook and forced myself to look down again. The darkness at the bottom of the basement wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied. And then the voice returned. Not loud, not dramatic, just certain. You've been here before. I shook my head without thinking. No, I whispered, even though I wasn't sure who I was answering anymore. A soft sound echoed back, almost like a laugh, but not human. The basement phone rang again. This time it didn't feel like it was behind me. It felt like it was inside the walls, surrounding me from every direction. I stepped down one stair without realizing it, then another. Against every instinct I had, I was moving closer to the source instead of away from it. The notebook in my hands suddenly felt heavier, like it didn't want me to carry it anymore. I looked down at the latest entry again. My name, still there, still fresh,
But now there was a second line written beneath it, a second line added while I was standing there. It read, "He is responding correctly." My breath caught in my throat. I slammed the notebook shut. The second I did, the ringing stopped completely. Total silence returned. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whatever this was had paused. But silence didn't feel safe. It felt like waiting. Then, from directly behind the basement wall, the voice spoke again, closer than before. He answered upstairs. My skin went cold. I hadn't answered anything upstairs except the phone, the unknown caller, the one that started this. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop even further. The house wasn't reacting to my presence. It was reacting to my decisions. Every call I answered, every step I took, every moment of hesitation, it was all being recorded, measured, processed. Like I wasn't exploring the house, I was participating in it. And something inside the basement was learning from me. Slowly, perfectly, patiently. The voice spoke one last time, and this time it didn't feel like it was below me anymore. It felt like it was right next to my ear. Continue.
What you're about to hear is real and horrifying. Tell me, where are you listening from? Feeling uneasy in your chest? Comment below. If you're new, follow now. I didn't continue immediately. That word, continue, didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like a command that had already accounted for my response. I stood frozen on the basement stairs, unsure whether moving forward or backward would even make a difference anymore. The house felt different now. Not haunted, not abandoned. Something more structured than that, like it had rules, and I had just started breaking them without knowing what they were. Slowly, I stepped back up toward the kitchen. Every movement felt watched. Not by eyes, by awareness. When I reached the top of the stairs, I turned off my flashlight and tried to steady my breathing. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was attentive, like the house was waiting to see what I would do next. Then my phone vibrated again. Unknown caller. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. Static. At first, just static, but underneath it, I could hear something new. Multiple voices layered over each other. Different tones, different distances, like recordings playing at slightly different speeds. And then one clear voice broke through. Not the calm whisper, not the cold instruction. This one sounded almost familiar. You've reached the part that records you back. My throat tightened. I looked around the kitchen. Nothing had physically changed, but I could feel it. The sense that the house was no longer just a location. It was a system, a mechanism that observed input and produced responses. The phone stopped suddenly. Silence again, but not the same silence as before. This one felt like anticipation. I moved toward the living room, trying to get distance from the basement door. That's when I noticed something on the wall. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but when I stepped closer, I realized it was writing. Faint, like dust had been wiped away deliberately. Letters forming words, and the words were new. Not old, not faded, recent. It read, "User response confirmed." My blood went cold. I stepped back immediately. My foot hit something on the floor. I looked down. Another notebook. But this one wasn't from the basement. It was placed in the living room, exactly where I had been standing.
I didn't pick it up right away. I already knew what it would contain. Still, I opened it, and I was right. New entries, each one time-stamped, each one describing my actions inside the house. Paused at stairs, answered unknown call, returned upstairs. It wasn't guessing, it was tracking. I slammed it shut and backed toward the front door. But when I reached it, the lock was already turned from the outside. And for the first time since entering the property, I realized something terrifying. The house didn't need to trap me, because it already knew I would stay long enough to finish what it wanted.
I stared at the front door handle for several seconds, trying to convince myself I was mistaken. Maybe I had locked it earlier without remembering. Maybe the mechanism had jammed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true, because I could feel it. The same way you can feel when someone is standing too close behind you, even if you can't see them. The house wasn't just observing anymore. It was responding. I stepped back slowly from the door and turned toward the hallway. The basement door was still slightly open, like it had never fully accepted that I left it. My phone vibrated again. Unknown caller. I didn't answer immediately this time. I just watched it vibrate on the kitchen counter like it was alive. After a few seconds, it stopped, then started again, more persistent, more deliberate. Finally, I picked it up. Static filled my ear instantly. But this time, the static wasn't random. It had rhythm, patterns, like language trying to form itself. Then the voice came through again, calm, unchanging. You are not the first layer. My grip tightened. What does that mean? I whispered without thinking. The phone went silent for half a second. Then, you are inside a repeating structure. I felt my stomach drop. I looked around the house again. The furniture, the hallway, the basement door. For the first time, I started noticing small inconsistencies. A chair slightly shifted from where I last remembered it. A picture frame angled differently. A door that I was certain I closed earlier, now slightly open again. Like the house was adjusting itself after every interaction. As if my presence was just another variable it had to account for. Then I heard something I hadn't heard before. Not the phone, not the basement, the front porch. A knock. 3 slow taps. I froze. The exact same pattern. The same rhythm I had read about in the notebooks. The same pattern recorded across different names, across different years. I didn't move. The knock came again, this time louder, more certain. Then the third time, and a voice followed immediately after, from outside the door, not through the phone, not through the walls, directly outside. You are responding correctly. My entire body locked up. I walked slowly toward the peephole. Every step felt wrong, like I was making a decision I couldn't undo. When I reached the door, I hesitated. Then I looked through and saw nothing, just darkness. But then the porch light flickered on by itself, and for a fraction of a second, I saw him, the man from the neighborhood, the black hoodie, standing exactly where I remembered him. Except this time, he wasn't watching the house. He was watching me through the door, and he smiled, like he had been waiting for me to finally reach this point. The light went out again, and the knocking stopped. But the silence that followed felt final, like something had just confirmed my position and accepted it. After the porch light went out, I didn't move for a long time. My hand stayed near the door handle, but I didn't touch it. I could still feel him outside. Not as a shape, not as a sound, but as a presence, like the air itself had shifted to acknowledge something was standing there. The house behind me felt even quieter now, which somehow made everything worse. No ticking appliances, no settling wood, no distant hum of pipes, just silence that felt controlled. Then my phone vibrated again. Unknown caller. I didn't answer this time. I just watched it, waiting. The vibration stopped, and immediately after, the basement phone rang again. But this time, it didn't come from below. It came from the hallway, closer. I slowly turned. The hallway light flickered once, then stabilized, and at the far end of the corridor, the rotary phone was sitting on the floor. Not on a table, not in a room, just placed there in the open hallway, as if it had been moved or carried. I stepped back toward the front door again, but something stopped me. A sound, soft, breathing, right behind me. I turned instantly. Nothing, but the feeling didn't disappear. It just shifted direction. Now it was coming from the hallway, from the phone. I moved slowly toward it, every instinct telling me not to. As I got closer, the phone began to ring. Not violently this time, not sudden. Slow, almost patient, like it was giving me time to decide. I stopped a few feet away. The ringing continued, then stopped on its own. A second later, my phone lit up again. Unknown caller. I stared at it for several seconds, and for reasons I still don't fully understand, I answered. This time there was no static, just silence. Then a voice, closer than before. "You saw him." My throat tightened. I didn't respond. The voice continued. "He is the interface." I didn't understand what that meant, but the word interface made my stomach drop for reasons I couldn't explain. I looked toward the hallway again. The rotary phone was now completely still. No sound, no movement. Then the voice on the phone spoke one last time, and it sounded almost satisfied. "You are ready for the next layer." The call ended. Immediately after, every light in the house turned off at once. Total darkness. And in that darkness, I heard the front door unlock itself. The front door didn't swing open right away. It eased open, slowly, like something on the other side was careful not to disturb the moment. I stood in complete darkness, unable to see the hallway, the kitchen, or even my own hands. But I could feel the air change as the door widened. Cold air from outside slipped inside the house, and with it, silence that felt even deeper than before. I didn't move. I couldn't tell if freezing was a choice or a reaction. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not outside. Inside. Coming from the hallway behind me. Slow. Measured. Like someone walking through a space they already knew well. I turned my head slightly, trying to adjust my eyes to the dark. Nothing. But the footsteps continued, moving closer, not rushing, not hesitating, confident. Then they stopped, right in front of me. A pause, too long. Then the voice spoke, not from the phone this time, not from any device, directly in front of me. "You are not inside the house anymore." My breathing stopped. "What do you mean?" I whispered. No answer at first. Then a soft exhale, almost like amusement. "You are inside the system that the house runs." I didn't understand, or maybe I didn't want to. A sudden flicker of light appeared near the doorway. Not electricity, something weaker, like a failing image trying to stabilize. And in that flicker, I saw him again, the man in the black hoodie. But he wasn't standing outside anymore. He was inside the doorway, not fully visible, like he was partially formed in the space between outside and inside. His head tilted slightly, just like before, that same unnatural recognition. And then he spoke again. "You responded to all layers correctly." My legs felt weak. Layers, the word repeated in my mind. Like everything I had experienced wasn't random, it was structured, designed. The man took a slow step forward, and with that step, the house behind him didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like a frame, like a boundary, something containing what was happening. And I finally understood something I had been avoiding since part 1. The man was not breaking into my life. He was guiding me through it, step by step, response by response, until I reached the point where there was no distinction left between the house, the phone, and whatever was speaking through them. The voice returned one final time, close, calm, certain. Final layer available. The darkness shifted again, and the front door opened fully. When the door opened fully, nothing rushed in. No wind, no figure, no sudden attack. Just silence. A controlled, waiting silence that felt more deliberate than anything I had experienced so far. I stood there for a moment, unable to decide whether I was supposed to step outside or whether something was waiting for me to do exactly that. Behind me, the house was still dark, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt complete, like every piece had already been placed where it needed to be. The man in the black hoodie was no longer clearly visible, but I could feel him. Not as a person, not even as a presence, more like confirmation. The final step in something I had unknowingly participated in since the beginning. My phone vibrated one last time. Unknown caller. I didn't even look at the screen. I already knew what it would say. Slowly, I raised it to my ear. No static this time. No layered voices. Just one clear signal. A calm, neutral tone that felt neither human nor mechanical. Session complete. I froze. The word session echoed in my mind. Before I could react, the voice continued. You have reached full response alignment. I looked back into the house, and for the first time I noticed something I had never seen before. Every notebook, every phone, every detail. It was all positioned like a system diagram. Not random objects, not haunted remnants, but organized components of something that had been tracking input and producing outcomes. My movements, my reactions, my fear, all recorded, all measured, all confirmed. The voice spoke again. You may leave now. I hesitated. Something inside me didn't trust the permission, but I also knew something worse. If I stayed, there was no guarantee I would remain the same version of myself that entered. So I stepped forward, out of the house, into the night. And the moment I crossed the threshold, the front door closed behind me on its own. No sound of locking, no final warning. Just closure. I turned back immediately. The house looked normal again. Quiet, empty, abandoned. Like nothing had ever happened inside it. Like I had imagined everything. Except for one thing. On the porch floor where I had stood moments earlier was a small flat stone. Clean, fresh, exactly like the ones before. But this one had something carved into it. A single word. Welcome back. And as I stood there reading it,
My phone vibrated one last time. Unknown caller. I didn't even look at the screen. I already knew what it would say. Slowly, I raised it to my ear. No static this time. No layered voices. Just a waiting silence. Not because the story was over, because it never really ends.
And with that, we bring tonight's terrifying story to an end. But remember, as the night grows darker, the secrets only grow deeper. Follow or subscribe now if you have the courage.